Hey guys, hope you guys are doing well. This is the first report for the composers, and the composer that I chose was Ruth Crawford Seeger. So, just a brief summary about her is she is an American composer who contributed to the folk revival. She was the first to receive the Guggenheim Fellowship in composition, which was one of the things that I noticed was more prominent in her talents. She did first train as a pianist, but her biggest talent was again in that composition. Now, this was enhanced as she studied theory and composition with Adolf Weidig, who was on the composition faculty of the American Conservatory. Some of her most notable works are The Adventures of Tom Thumb, Music for Small Orchestra, and Five Songs to Poems by Sandburg. Here are the two biggest influences that she had in her life. So it was Henry Cowell and Charles Seeger. Seeger does have familiarity with the last name, and we'll get to that later. But Henry Cowell basically secured a spot for Crawford in Blanche Walton's home. Now that's kind of where she took off her career took off, really. Now Charles Seeger was won over by Crawford based on those compositional gifts. Now Seeger was arranged to meet Crawford to study composition in 1925. That was through Henry Cowell. Now, the only reason that Seeger agreed to train her or to allow her to work with him was because he noticed the ideas that she had as far as counterpoint, and they had similar ideas that were linear to the musical organization. And that was shown through most of their collaborative work, such as Tradition and Experiment in the New Music and Serialism. You could see the free tonality and the serialism evident. It was shown. Now, Charles Seeger, this is interesting because, again, the last name is familiar. He divorced his wife with 3 sons to marry Crawford. They wed in 1932, and she stopped her modernist works in 33. But before we get to that, she originally decided to align herself with only American composers. She was a modern composer herself, so she preferred it to be ultra-modern even. She spent 1931 and 32 in Berlin and Paris, and through this time, she kept in contact in composition or involving composition talks with Seeger. So this is before they wed. Now, once she got married, when she had her child with Seeger, her life slowed down. She had to balance the life of a mother as well as a composer. She moved to Washington, D.C. with Seeger. She did continue this a little bit as she worked at the Archive of American Folksong. She transcribed over hundreds of recordings, and some which appear into the Lomax's influential collection of Our Singing Country, which came out in 1941. She basically transformed the American traditional music dynamic. Now, she resumed in 1940s. She wrote a piece called Suite for the Wind Quintet. This piece actually won the competition that was sponsored by the Washington chapter of the National Association for American Composers and Conductors for New Chamber Work. Now, as she sparked that passion again, this unfortunately was her last piece before she died of intestinal cancer. She was 52, and it was in 1953. Now, one of the biggest quotes that I took out from my research was, the free atonal language of her violin sonata establishes her distinctive, uncompromisingly modernistic sensibility. Now, the only reason it was so distinctive was because of her dissonant sound that she consistently played in most of her pieces. Not only was it dissonant, but again, it was very modern. It was somehow modern, but captured that changing dynamic to make sure that she had those influences from Cowell, from Seeger, that allowed her to become as prominent as she was known. Now, the String Quartet 1931 is her best-known composition, and that was actually the piece that I focused on most. Again, it is String Quartet 1931. This mainly focused on that dramatic curve that we were talking about. It mainly focused on that dissonant sound, the texture and timbre of the string instruments. Now, the music starts slow and dissonant, as conveyed in my research, but it seems to crescendo towards the end. There also appears to be complete atonality, as the biography suggested. So that's one thing that was proven to me. Now, as far as listening to the musical piece, it was consistent in its tempo. The beats followed correctly, and I can't say this conclusively, but I am inclined to believe that this piece is a disjunct melody. Based on my research, which is not exhaustive, it has proven true, especially in the dissonant nature of Crawford's music, as described in this biography. Now, I'm not a big fan of the dissonant sound, so I did think that her story was interesting. I thought it was very interesting that one of the composers that she studied with, that she worked alongside, she ended up marrying. Now, it seems as though her life took a bit of a turn. She wasn't able to expand that range of music as she would have liked, yet she somehow still made a significant impact. So again, a few things that I learned through this research was that composition. Composition was something huge that she was able to acquire from every bit of knowledge that she picked at, whether it was where she was studying at in Chicago, whether it was in Washington, whether it was overseas. That was something that developed herself on her own, with the help of her husband particularly. Now, again, I'm not a big fan of it. I don't like that atonal sound as well. But it is very, very interesting to see the kind of melody and the distinct nature of it, how different it sounds. It sounds modern, yet it still has a bit of that, I guess, not very... Well, it's very unique, actually, but it's not normal. It goes against the norm. And so it does remind me of a few things, as we spoke about Schoenberg. Now, it was funny to note that she actually did not follow Schoenberg for her own reasons, but that was something that kind of resonated with me the most, his music as well as hers. They both had that distinctive separation with what they wanted to do and what they wanted to take away with their musical contribution. But I'm glad that I actually read into this piece. Crawford's a very, very interesting musician. And with that being said, if you guys have any questions, if you guys had any comments, please go ahead and reply. And I wish you guys a good night.